You twisted the throttle and the whole world changed. The Tecumseh engine screamed to life under the seat, your hands shook on the handlebars, and the dirt path behind your house turned into a highway that went everywhere and nowhere, and it didn't matter because you were moving. You were 12 years old and you had a Rupp minibike, and nobody on earth could catch you. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. You saw it before you had it. That's the part nobody talks about. You saw it in the back of Boy's Life magazine, wedged between the ad for the Polaris submarine and the one for the muscle building course. A full-color photograph of a bright red mini bike with chrome fenders and fat tires and a boy on it who looked exactly like you, except he was grinning in a way that suggested he knew something you didn't. The ad said Rupp Roadster across the top. It said 3.5 horsepower at the bottom, and somewhere between those two facts, your life divided into before and after. Before, you were a kid on a bicycle. After, you were a kid who wanted something so badly it kept you up at night. You tore that page out. You folded it and put it in your pocket and carried it around for weeks. You left it on the kitchen table where your father would see it. You taped it to the refrigerator. You brought it up at dinner, casually, like you just thought of it, like you hadn't been thinking about it every waking moment since Tuesday. And your father looked at it and looked at you and said something like, "We'll see," which in your house meant either maybe or absolutely not. And you spent the next 3 months trying to figure out which one it was. And then one day, a birthday or Christmas or a Saturday that started like every other Saturday, there it was, in the garage, or in the driveway, or leaning against the side of the house with a bow on the handlebars that your mother had put there because she understood something your father didn't, which is that this wasn't just a machine. This was the most important object that had ever entered your life. The first time you sat on it, your feet barely touched the ground. The seat was hard, the handlebars were cold, the engine smelled like gasoline and new metal and something else you couldn't name, something that smelled like the future. Your father showed you the choke, he showed you the primer, he showed you how to pull the starter cord with a quick snap of the wrist, not a long, slow pull. And when that Tecumseh engine coughed and caught and settled into a rattling idle that vibrated through the frame and up through your arms and into your chest, you understood for the first time in your life what power felt like. Not the power of being told what to do, the power of going where you wanted. That first ride, you remember it. Not the details, not the route, not the speed, not how long it lasted. You remember the feel of it. The way the handlebars pulled when you hit a rut, the way the engine note changed when you leaned into a turn, the way the wind pushed your hair back and dried the sweat on your forehead and made your eyes water, the way the ground blurred under you and the tires kicked up a rooster tail of dirt behind you that you couldn't see but you knew was there because your friend told you later it looked incredible. The way the world, which had always been exactly as big as the distance you could pedal on your Schwinn, suddenly became twice that size, 3 times, 10 times. You could go to the creek, you could go to the field behind the school, you could go to the woods where the older kids built forts, you could go to the quarry and the railroad tracks and the dirt road that ran along the back of the farms and connected to another dirt road that led somewhere you'd never been before and might never go again, but it didn't matter. Because the point wasn't arriving. The point was going. The trails you rode became yours. You knew every route, every rock, every puddle that was deeper than it looked. You knew the hill where you had to downshift and the straightaway where you could open it up and the turn at the bottom where the gravel was loose and you had to lean just right or you'd slide into the ditch. You knew these things the way your father knew the roads he drove to work, by feel, by instinct, by having done it 1,000 times until the path and the machine and the boy were all one thing. You were 12 years old and you had a motor between your legs and no one was telling you where to go. The sound carried. That's something people forget. A Tecumseh 3.5 horsepower 4-stroke engine at full throttle wasn't quiet. It was a high, angry buzzing that echoed off houses and fences and garage doors and carried 3 blocks in every direction, and within 10 minutes of your first ride, every kid in the neighborhood knew. They came on their bikes, they came on foot, they stood at the edge of the yard and watched you ride back and forth on that red Rupp like it was a parade, and every single one of them wanted what you had, not the bike. The feeling of being the kid who had the thing that every other kid wanted. And then came the part that made it more than a toy. The engine didn't always start. Some mornings it was cold and the choke had to be set just right, and the primer had to be pumped exactly 3 times, not 2, not 4, and the cord had to be pulled at exactly the right speed. And when it didn't start, you had to figure out why. You learned to check the spark plug, you learned to clean the air filter, you learned to adjust the chain tension with a wrench that lived in your back pocket. You learned that gasoline goes bad if it sits too long, that oil has to be at the right level, that the carburetor has a little screw on the side that controls the fuel mixture, and if you turn it a quarter turn clockwise, the engine runs leaner, and if you turn it back, it runs richer. And the difference between the two is the difference between an engine that screams and an engine that coughs. Nobody taught you this in school. Nobody gave you a grade. You learned it because if you didn't learn it, you didn't ride. And riding was everything. Your father watched you from the kitchen window. He watched you on your knees in the driveway with grease on your hands and a socket wrench and a look on your face that he recognized because it was the same look he had when he was under the hood of his own car. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He knew what was happening. His son was becoming someone who could fix things. The man who built it, the man whose name was stamped on the frame, was someone you never met but should have. Mickey Rupp was 22 years old and unemployed when he started building go-karts in his basement in Mansfield, Ohio. Not because he had a business plan, because he liked things that went fast. He had grown up around engineers. His father worked at Gorman Rupp Pumps. His brother-in-law was A.J. Watson, the legendary chassis designer whose cars won 7 Indianapolis 500s. Speed was in his blood the way music is in a musician's kid. He couldn't help it. By 1960, Mickey had 8 employees and a 3,000 square foot shop and a go-kart called the Dart Cart that was winning races all over the country. By 1962, he was building mini-bikes. By 1963, Sears was selling them in their catalog, the same catalog you flip through on the living room floor. By 1965, Mickey Rupp did something that most men only dream about. He qualified for the Indianapolis 500 and finished 6th at Indy. The rookie class that year included Mario Andretti, who finished 3rd, and Unser, who finished behind Mickey. The man who built your mini bike had raced against legends and beaten most of them. But he couldn't race and run a company at the same time. The company needed him more than the track did. So Mickey Rupp walked away from Indianapolis and went back to Mansfield and kept building the machines that every boy in America wanted. By 1970, Rupp Industries had 400 employees, 23 engineers, a 180,000 square foot factory, and was producing 75,000 mini bikes a year, $30 million in annual sales. A journalist named Brock Yates wrote that Mickey Rupp was one of the hottest young industrialists in the state of Ohio, and every single one of those 75,000 mini bikes went to a kid who tore the page out of a magazine and taped it to the refrigerator and waited. A kid who checked the mailbox every day for the Sears catalog. A kid who circled the Rupp on page 212 and left the catalog open on the kitchen counter where his mother would find it. A kid who did extra chores without being asked and said nothing about why. 75,000 boys a year in every state, in every town, living the same dream that started with one man in a basement. Then the world changed. In 1973, the oil embargo hit, gas prices doubled. Parents stopped buying gasoline-powered toys for their kids. That same year, the snow didn't come, and Rupp's snowmobile business, which accounted for 35,000 units a year, collapsed overnight. The company was bleeding money. Mickey tried to hold on. He couldn't. On April 1st, 1973, Mickey Rupp sold a controlling interest in Rupp Industries to an investment group led by a man named Joseph Hrudka from Mr. Gasket. And then the thing happened that you never want to read about. The thing that turns a success story into a tragedy. Mickey Rupp, the man who built the company in his basement, who raced at Indianapolis, who put his name on every frame and every fender, was removed from the daily operations of his own company. The man whose name was on the building wasn't allowed to run what was inside it anymore. The new owners didn't understand what Mickey understood. They didn't understand that a Rupp wasn't just a mini bike, it was a promise. A promise that something built in Mansfield, Ohio, by a man who cared about speed and quality and the look on a kid's face, would start every time and ride like nothing else on the road. The quality slipped, the designs got cheaper, the soul went out of it. And then came Honda. The Mini Trail Z50, the CT70 Trail 70, Japanese bikes that were lighter, cheaper, more reliable, and backed by a company with more resources than every American mini bike maker combined. The bikes were better, that was the truth, nobody wanted to admit. They started easier. They broke less. They looked more like real motorcycles. And for a 14-year-old boy standing in a showroom in 1974, looking at a Honda Trail 70 on one side and a Rupp Scrambler on the other, the choice wasn't as hard as it should have been. The American mini bike industry, Rupp, Taco, Bonanza, Lil Indian, all of them couldn't compete. These were small companies run by men who loved what they built, but love doesn't beat engineering budgets and global supply chains and dealership networks that stretch across every town in America. One by one, they folded. The same way the American television makers folded, the same way the American radio makers folded, the same way every American manufacturer who built something with pride and sold it at a fair price eventually folded when someone overseas figured out how to build it cheaper and ship it faster. Rupp Industries filed for bankruptcy in 1978. The factory in Mansfield went quiet, the machines stopped, the parking lot emptied, and somewhere in a million garages across America, the Rupp mini bikes that had carried a generation of boys across fields and through woods and down dirt roads sat silent, gathering dust, waiting for a rider who had grown up and moved away and forgotten until right now what it felt like to twist that throttle and go. But Mickey Rupp didn't stop. That's the part that matters. After he lost his company, he moved to Florida, took up sport fishing, and within a year, he was building again. Rupp Marine outriggers and fishing gear designed with the same precision and the same stubbornness and the same refusal to build anything that wasn't exactly right. He ran that company for 20 years before handing it to his son and his son-in-law, and then he moved back to Mansfield, back to the town where it all started, back to the streets where the first Dart cart had rattled across a shopping center parking lot in 1959. Someone asked him once if he was surprised that people were still restoring his old mini bikes, still paying hundreds of dollars for a rusty Roadster or a beat-up Scrambler. He said, yeah, it's amazing. The whole Rupp Industries experience flew by. It was fast and furious. We took it all for granted. Mickey Rupp died on August 20th, 2023. He was 87 years old. He died at home in Mansfield, surrounded by his wife Jeannie and his family. Indianapolis Motor Speedway issued a statement. The Snowmobile Hall of Fame had already honored him. The Industrial Museum in Mansfield had already put his machines behind glass. But the real monument isn't behind glass. The real monument is in a garage somewhere in Ohio, or Long Island, or California, or wherever you grew up. It's a red frame with chrome fenders and a Tecumseh engine that hasn't run in 40 years. The tires are flat, the chain is rusted, The seat is cracked from sitting in the sun too long, but if you kneel down next to it and put your hand on the engine and close your eyes, you can still feel the vibration. You can still hear the sound. You can still smell the gasoline and the exhaust and the dirt. And for 1 second that lasts longer than it should, you're 12 years old again and the throttle is in your hand and the whole world is a dirt path that goes on forever. They don't make them in Mansfield anymore. They don't make them anywhere. Honda won. The oil crisis won. The lawyers and the liability insurance and the safety regulations won. The world decided that a 12-year-old boy on a 3.5 horsepower gasoline engine with no helmet and no license and no adult supervision was a problem that needed to be solved. And they solved it. They solved it so completely that most boys today have never heard the sound of a Tecumseh engine, have never smelled exhaust on a Saturday morning, have never felt the pull of a throttle or the freedom of a dirt road or the pride of fixing something with their own two hands. Mickey Rupp gave you that, all of it. From a basement in Mansfield, Ohio, with 8 employees and a dream about speed. And the boy who taped that ad to the refrigerator, the boy who waited and hoped and finally got the thing he wanted more than anything, that boy is still in there. He's 65 or 70 now, and his knees hurt and his back is stiff, and he hasn't ridden anything faster than a lawnmower in 30 years, but he's still in there. And he still remembers the day the world got bigger.